What's your outlook for the price of gold in 2014?
Well, I've refrained from predicting exactly what I think the price of gold is going to be. I think it's going to go much higher in 2014 due to a number of global macroeconomic factors. I think that the diminishment of quantitative easing, or tapering as they call it, is positive for gold. I think that the transmigration of gold from Swiss vaults to Middle Eastern and Asian vaults is good for gold. I think China's increased investment demand for gold is good for the price of gold. And certainly, we aren't finding that many new mines. So relative to the available supply, the price must increase.
How would you describe the current state of the mining space?
I would characterize the state of the mining sector now as the aftermath of a train wreck. There are some cars lying off the tracks that are still usable and functional and can be returned to service. There are some cars that are mangled beyond recognition and will never be functional again. However, the reviving of the sector as a whole has now started as a result of the rise in precious metals prices. And it's been 3.5 years pretty much of a very persistent bear market. And I think over the last couple of quarters, we've seen that the bottom seems to be in. So there's so many assets out there that are now trading so cheaply, so many companies trading for a discount to cash. And with the rise in precious metals, people are starting to recognize that now is the time to resurrect some of these projects, because once gold starts to rise again through 2000, assuming it's going to do that, then a lot of these projects that are inviable, like with gold at 1,300, 1,200, will now be back in the viable sort of space.
Do you see any downside catalysts that will take gold lower in 2014?
Well, absolutely. The most pernicious downside catalyst that has been a factor driving the price of gold down since its high of $1,924 in September 2011 is the futures market and in the ETF market. So in the GLD, for example, all of that gold, which is represented by paper, can be dually owned. So you can own it on the long side, and you can have it owned on the short side. So what that essentially amounts to is a whole lot of artificial supply that does not exist and is not represented by actual gold. Same in the futures market. We've seen the sales of paper gold, and again, there's no delivery of actual physical gold. And so what we have is an artificial supply of gold represented by paper, which is not settled in gold, and so therefore is actually an artificial downward sales force.
What's your outlook for base metals this year? Is there a base metal that you like more than others?
I don't think that there's one that I like more than others per se. Certainly the chances for some are better than for others. I think that zinc is going to rise dramatically in price due to diminishing supply and increasing demand. I think that copper is going to rise in price due to diminishing supply and rising demand. And I think graphite is actually going to rise in price because there will be increased demand, and a lot of these graphite companies that are out there exploring might not make it to production. So the more advanced ones and the larger ones will.
Are there any junior resource companies that you think stand out?
The one that I own the most of right now is Mason Graphite, and it is putting together the Lac Guéret project in Quebec. It's already at pre-feasibility. It's got a very substantial resource. It's very high grade. It's large flake. So Benoit Gascon was the gentleman who built the sales channels for Tinkalb, formerly Canada's only operating graphite mine, which is now owned by multinational Imerys. And so the president of Mason Graphite has a history of building sales channels in custom graphite products. So that, in my mind, puts Mason Graphite out in front of the pack when it comes to who's going to go into production first. And then in the precious metals complex, the company that intrigues me the most at this point, even though I don't own it, I tried to own it, but the price has been running upward lately, is Klondex Mines. And Klondex Mines is headed by Paul Hewitt, who was formerly with Newmont. And Paul recently acquired the Midas mine for Klondex, and the Midas mine was formerly known as the Ken Snyder mine. Now, this is a mine that Newmont's been operating for quite some time, and Newmont was getting ready to shut it down. And Paul's feeling was, having worked there for many years, that there was a substantial amount of ore left in an area where Newmont had declined to explore. And so this was in February 14th that the acquisition closed, and within days of taking possession of the mine, they drilled and added across 110 feet, and they hit assays between 200 and 300 ounces per ton of silver, as well as an ounce per ton gold. So that's incredible, and those kinds of grades near surface are what can sustain a company in production even with a low gold price. So after the last cycle, there's a new mindset that needs to be incorporated into evaluating mining companies in the precious metal space if one is going to participate in investments. And that is, you've got to consider the all-in costs in the long term, because if gold is going to continue to be somewhat volatile, then you need to focus on the companies with the very low all-in operating costs, the very high grades, and scalable production. They can scale production upward. They're only at 600 tons per day now. They have a 1,200 ton per day mill. They can scale up to 1,200. Why don't they? Because presently their tailings strategy is pretty much maxed out, and they're in the process of permitting a new one, which will take about a year. And they also have the Fire Creek project, which is 100 miles away or so, and they truck ore from that to Midas at the cost of about $32 a ton. So still very viable, and Fire Creek has great grades as well.
Keep up to date with all your favorite small caps. Subscribe to our free daily newsletter featuring investment ideas, breakout stocks, analyst research, and more. SmallCapPower.com. Investing ideas and research.